morning, everybody. I'm Jacob Rees, Program Director of Nordic Game, if you didn't notice before. I hope you had a good yesterday, our day one. Were you all there? Yes. Good. How was it? Nice, great, good. That was the Finnish version of great. It was good. So we have so much more in store for you today. It's amazing to be here and present it. Obviously, I'm not going to present the entire program on the theater. We still have the honor of having Paula Manrique to do all this, except for this first intro, because I want to introduce our first speaker today, because it's a very dear friend of Nordic Game. Back in, I think it was 2010, I met with a small Danish developer called Copenhagen Game Collective, and we started talking about it. They were pitching this idea: what if we took the young, new, talented developers, and they are poor, Jacob. So can we do like a free day, a free night before Nordic Game starts? And I thought it was a brilliant idea. So we worked on it, and then we started. What should we call it? What are they? They're new. It's like indies. Indies is a good name. And then we invented the Nordic Game Indie Night. And it was a great success. And it was like the beginning of Nordic Game focusing a lot on the talent and the new developers of the Nordics. And since then, we've seen so many great games. And developers starting off there and then developing into something bigger and better. I don't know. But one of these guys from Copenhagen Game Collective was Korsgaard. And Lau was an indie back then. And now he's the lead designer at Massive, especially on the Avatar game. So that makes it a great honor, and I think kind of a fitting start to day two, to present to you Korsgaard.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Really exciting to be here. I was, as Jakob said, I was here in 2010, standing on this stage and doing weird stuff with maybe some of you guys. I am, as Jakob said, a lead game designer at Massive Entertainment since 2020. And here I'm going to talk about Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, a game I worked on that we released in 2023. I like talks where the speaker just kind of like geek out on a subject matter. That might not be kind of like super relevant to whatever I'm sitting with, but like just deep dive on something weird. And I hope you do too, because this talk will be about a very specific set of mechanics and loops in Frontiers of Pandora, and how I was part of shaping those. But also, actually, I won't talk so much about that. I would also spend a good deal of my time talking about a new hobby I got, but more about that later. So, what am I pointing at? How do I go next? Sorry. 2 seconds. How do I go next? Green. Green? No, sorry.
Hold on. Give me 1 sec.
1 second. Yes. Wait. Yeah, now I think it's good. Here we are. Okay, thank you. Sorry. So yeah, just quickly about a bit of history as we talked about. I've been working since 2020 at Massive. Before that, I was creative director in a independent game studio in Copenhagen called Not Games, where we worked on kind of like silly physical party games. And even before that, I was part of Copenhagen Game Collective, doing kind of like events, exploring kind of like the space between art and game, and all sorts of like kind of like just trying to push for making a scene of experimental and interesting games here in this region. So I've been on a bit of a journey from kind of like very fringe game development to working on some of the biggest kind of like movie blockbuster titles. That conversation or that talk is for another day. Now we're going to talk about Avatar. So I hope most of you know kind of like James Cameron's Avatar franchise. In a nutshell, Avatar depicts indigenous people, the Na'vi, on the moon Pandora, fighting against the colonizing bad guys and the organization called RDA. So in the game Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, that takes place in a parallel with the movies, but it happens on a second frontier, kind of like far away from the main plot of the well-known narrative. You play as a Na'vi kid that is kidnapped by the RDA and trained in the RDA's tactics and ideology to be used as a weapon against your own people. But you manage to escape, and now you need to relearn how it is to be a Na'vi and unite the clans of the Western frontiers to fight back the RDA. The game is a first-person action-adventure RPG about fighting bad guys, but it's also a game about being alien in your own land and slowly learning how to understand the way of the Na'vi and to live in a symbiotic relationship with nature, where you only take what you need. Let me take some water. So, harvesting and gathering as a game mechanic is a kind of like common used mechanic in a lot of different games, right? Like we know a lot of popular games where you go out in nature and you harvest things and you gather, you craft stuff. It is also a key part of Na'vi culture. They live off the land, they gather materials, they harvest, and they craft. So it seems like, you know, these mechanics would be a perfect fit for an Avatar game, right? Sorry. And I think that's kind of like sort of true, but it's also challenging. My experience playing these type of games is that I have a kind of like a very, you know, exploitative relationship with the resources of the world when I play, right? I want to gather everything I see. I want to empty the land of resources when I play, you know, a harvesting and crafting game. And that's kind of like nothing inherently wrong with those play patterns. But in the context of the Avatar universe, that is the mentality of the RDA, right? Of the bad guys. The core conflict of Avatar is that the bad guys goes to a strange new world. They deplete all the resources, don't think about harmony, they just take what they see. So it would be kind of like hollow and tone deaf if we, to the source material, if we created motivational loops where that repeated these kind of like behavioral patterns. So how do we create a harvesting system that respects the underlying ethos and lifestyle of the Na'vi? That kind of like challenge of reshaping the player's approach to resources and the world around them, it was identified very early in the development of Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. Like way before my time on the project. And the team defined some kind of like fundamental guiding principles that were critical in exploring the right paths and the right perspectives when designing the harvesting systems. So I've kind of like identified kind of like 3 ground rules they defined. One of them is quality over quantity, and I think that's the most fundamental one, and a pretty kind of like good idea, I think. That the game should never be about harvesting a lot of material, but it should be about harvesting the best material. You should put kind of like care and effort into finding the right things. Secondly, the power comes from nature, so the player grows stronger from what they harvest and craft, but also in the sense that nature needs to be healed and pollution needs to be removed in order to grow in power. So there's a very direct relationship with the RDA that is polluting this world, is the bad guys, and my growth is hindered by their pollution. And lastly, harvesting should require effort, and that's the thing I worked actually quite a lot on implementing concretely. But like, I'm not sure you can see it here, but like we have implemented this kind of like little mini game. So everything you pick up, everything you harvest requires actual input and effort, and it takes time. It has to be like an active choice that the player do, so you're not kind of like vacuum up everything around you, and it's just like you can just take anything you want. So all this was established like pretty early, before a lot of the other gameplay. And it's interesting, like these kind of like ground rules stayed with us during this development, where a lot of other things moved around in the development of the project. But these kind of like fundamental ground rules about like our relationship with the resources and nature stayed with us. And when I joined, I was interested in turning these principles into an experience. So, like I was curious about like how would it feel to harvest? How you know what feelings and what experience are we chasing here? Because some of this can be kind of like philosophical, but like I wanted to have a kind of like concrete reference. And to talk about how I approach that, I want to talk about something that doesn't have anything to do with game design. Because like, you know, I'm a white Western city living person on Earth, right? Like how can I relate to, you know, Navi people on Pandora, and like how can I like put myself in the frame of mind of these people? I think that's hard. I have like very few things in common with them. So how can I kind of like understand what feeling and experiences we're chasing here? I had one thing, plant dying. So my wife, who's a fashion designer, started practicing plant dyeing in the years I was working on the harvesting systems on Avatar. And I was with her on that journey, learning the craft, kind of like in second order learning the craft. I was out there foraging for materials in nature, and all that gave me kind of like a bit of a new perspective of being in nature and the relationship to nature. So what is plant dyeing? Let's dive a bit into that. Plant dyeing is a kind of like a thousands of year old practice of coloring textiles with dyes extracted from natural sources, such as plant and mushrooms and sometimes even animals. There's kind of like a rich kind of like history to this. We know some of you probably, you know, even kind of like have a reference to colors like indigo or like scarlet, red, and like the red colors of the royalty in Europe. And like all these things hold actually high cultural power as well, like throughout history, like who created the various colors were in like some kind of like cultural and also economical power. So there's like a kind of like a rich history around plant dyeing. It's also just a common craft that everybody has learned across the planet. You can find them in all cultures, this practice of dyeing your textiles with colors, obviously. So the process of dyeing a piece of textiles, like this t-shirt, is that you go out in nature, you find some plants. You should find the right ones, because some plants are better at dyeing and have different colors than others. You go home, you put these plant materials in a pot of water, you boil it to extract the dye into the water, then you dump in the textiles, you let it simmer in water, and you pull out the textiles, and you see the magic happen. They turned into a color, right? And before you put in the textiles, you probably prepare the textiles with some kind of like mordants to bind the dye to the textile fibers. It could be tannin or aluminium cells, and even iron would like change the color and so on. So there's kind of like it's almost like witchcraft. You're standing there, you're boiling your herbs and so on, and you're putting in things, and then bing, magic happened. So I think it's a super fun process to do, and everybody can actually try to do that. I want to kind of like just point at a few things where I felt some similarities, or stuff I drew from learning to do plant dyeing that I kind of like could held as a mirror against my work as a game designer. First of all, language shapes perception. I think that's a kind of like pretty established linguistic theory, that we not only use language to describe the world, we also use language to perceive the world. The more you learn, the more nuanced language you learn about a subject matter, the richer that subject matter can turn into, and you literally see more. I have a kind of like one simple example is that I, for a long time, had a black jacket until I mentioned that color of the jacket to my wife, who is like a kind of like fashion designer, so she works with colors and so on, and she was confused because I didn't have a black jacket. It was a navy blue jacket apparently, and at that point I learned that there was a color called navy blue, and I could start seeing that, and suddenly my jacket was another color. And even if it was black, there's like shades of black. So this is kind of like, you can search for like, what kind of like shades of blacks exist out there. And if you do work, as an artist, and you like, I don't know, paint a lot of shadows, you know that you never want to like make a shadow like true pitch black. You always want to have like hues and shades in those blacks, right? So obviously, you can develop a language and a nuanced understanding of like the shades of black, which like seems ridiculous to maybe the rest of us. That like, why do we need names for these things that are like kind of the same, right? And I think the same thing was true for me going out and learning more about plants that I had to forage for. It became very kind of like concrete. So like, for instance, like back in the days, I don't know, 5 years ago, when I took a walk in the countryside in Denmark and I was looking at, flowers next to the road and was like, oh, cute yellow flowers, nice, right? So that was like my language of understanding what I saw. But once you start kind of like building a relationship and learning the names of these different flowers, you see richer nature, right? Like, so we have like goldenrod, we have vote, we have golden buttons and tickseed here. And all of these have like different meanings to me. And I have like been trying to find them in nature. They grow different places. So I suddenly start seeing a much more richer nature when I'm out there. And I think that's kind of like very intrinsically fun and rewarding for everyone to open your mind for a richer world. In our game Avatar, we have a very kind of like concrete realization of this experience. We have something we call the Hunter's Guide, and you can use your Navi senses out in the world to like look and like scan different plants and so on, and you will learn the names for them, and you will learn more things when like looking at them. You will learn where they grow, what they're called, the stats they give in crafting, and where you find, let me push the button, kind of like where you find the best ones, which was interesting, right? So like in this example, I'm looking for a specific reed, and I can see that the best reed is growing in the middle of an island, and I can open the map and I can see that island, right? So this kind of like, this Hunter's Guides becomes this kind of like a very concrete physical representation of the knowledge I've gathered through the game. So another thing I learned is that being in nature with a purpose is kind of like way more powerful and interesting than visiting nature, if that makes sense, right? Like I think often when a lot of us, especially like city living people, when we experience nature, we visit nature. We go out there and we walk around and we're like, oh, nature, cool. Or we might be walking through nature because we have to go somewhere else. But if you go foraging, if you go out there with a purpose, but not a clear destination, it becomes like another way of interacting with the environment, I feel. And I think, like, look at this. Like, this is again like an environment around where I live in Copenhagen, and that is like, it looks pretty. You can walk by and it's like interesting. But if you're told that you have to go find specific things here, a specific plant that grows in a specific place, then this environment becomes kind of like an exciting space to explore. I feel, right? What is around the corner here? What is under this bush? We've been like, if you need to go to forage for reed, for instance, like reed is only blossoming in August, and it gives a nice green color when you use it. So like going on that journey, being like, oh, it's August, we need to go out and find reed, becomes this kind of like adventure and a treasure hunt. You visit a landscape, you look for, where would I find reed in this environment? Maybe you think about, oh, if I was a reed, where would I be? And maybe you seek towards water and so on. So that becomes like a journey and an adventure. And in Avatar, we do that as well. So the game and the world is designed with a lot of kind of like logical rules and so on. Like the trees are growing in certain ways, and we see dead trees next to them and small trees next to big trees and all sorts of stuff. So it's like very kind of like logical according to rules. But we also design the world with intention. And all these places where we have various harvestables, for instance, the rare harvestable on that island, the rare reed on that island, we can author that journey to be interesting because we decided that that reed goes here. So this island, for instance, we see here this player going on a journey to that island, but suddenly they were attacked by something, right? So you go to the island, you figure out like, what is going on here? I was just looking for reed, and then you discover that this island is also the home of the most powerful apex predator in the game, like an aerial predator. So suddenly the journey to get reed became another story. You become interrupted, and that becomes a story to tell, right? And obviously, from our perspective, all this is authored, right? We knew that we were like putting that reed there, and that player were going there blindly, and they suddenly get attacked. But authoring those experiences was something we worked on, and we called that like the harvesting journeys. And we really worked for each of the harvestables. We thought about like what would be the journey to get that thing. And thirdly, the final result of what you're making is often much more than the sum of its parts. So this is some of the stuff that my wife has been doing. She's better at plant dyeing than me. But I think there's like something magical about that kind of like whole journey, as I talked about, of like, okay, you learn about a plant, you go out, you figure out when to harvest it, you travel on a journey to find it, you come back, you put it in the water, you boil it, you look at the color of the water, you put in textiles, you pull them up, and you see, you can maybe have folded the textiles in Japanese shibori patterns or tie-dye patterns and so on. You pull it out and you see it, and suddenly you have transformed something that was like maybe like a stained white t-shirt to something new, something you can wear. And that thing becomes much more than just, the look of it. It becomes like a representation of your journey. And it has like a meaning. It has a connection all the way back to nature, right? Like I can at least feel it. I have like a sense of like, oh, that plant gave me these colors. So I think that means that for these, I think there's like a special kind of like feeling and meaning to these objects that are like kind of like hand-produced and handcrafted that way. We also kind of like try to put special emphasis on that in Avatar. In our crafting system, it was important for us that you could actually trace the materials that you picked up on that island and so on. You can trace them all the way up to the final look of the pieces you made. So you can see like the textures are swapping depending on what materials you're putting in. And that way, like, it's not only a gameplay impact, like the different kind of like harvestables give different stats and so on, so you can in that way game the systems and game the numbers, but they also have like an aesthetic and a meaning, a visual meaning and a visual representation for you. And I think that helps make that connection for you and helps you be proud of what you did. And I think that's one of the things that, I don't know if it surprised us, it surprised us a little, but like the community of the players of Avatar, a lot of them spend most of the time online and so on, showing off themselves and their outfits and what they did, right? And I think that becomes this kind of like representation of the journeys and the efforts and the hard work that they have been on in order to craft these things. Like imagine that you went out there, you got attacked by a predator, and you fought it off, and you finally got these materials, and all that becomes like more than just the look of the thing. So I feel that's one of the reasons why people are so proud and so happy to share how they look in the game. So, to sum all this up, I don't claim that all the mechanics that we worked on and all the decisions we made kind of like comes from plant dyeing. Not at all. I think game design is a kind of like complex process. It's a team process where a lot of different stakeholders have ideas and interesting directions we're pushing the design. But I think what this experience gave me is that it gave me kind of like confidence in a experience goal. And I think if anything, everybody can come in with ideas. Everybody can say like, well, the game designer should do this, or I think we should have this mechanic and this mechanic. And that's great as a game designer. But I think if anything, the game designers needs to hold these kind of like experience goals in their mind. They need to hold and defend the why. Like why are we having this hunter's guide where you can like store the knowledge of the world? Why are we showing the textures of the materials and the final crafted objects and so on? And holding those kind of like experience goals in your head and defending them, I think is actually the role of the game designer. It is not to come up with the mechanics and come up with the ideas. Like we have like plenty of people that can help doing that, but be the one that actually make all these tie together. And make them coherent to reach this kind of like experience goal. I think that's what we are bringing to the table essentially. That's it. Thank you. I think we actually do have some time for questions. I was saying out there, but maybe I have been speed talking. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lau. Thank you. We do have time for one question, so is anybody up to that? Anybody have a question? Yeah, over there.
Hello. Hello, check, check. Hi, Lau.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. I mean, you went into some of this, so I hope I'm not repeating too much. I'm just curious. I feel like, especially in AAA, there is a sort of, we can expect players to try to optimize everything when they play. And you're faced with the challenge of making a system that says, maybe that's not the best idea. Like, maybe you can't optimize here. How do you square that? Like, how do you approach that problem of trying to not make this sort of colonial simulator thing, or like exploitation simulator, and avoiding it becoming just sort of tedious? Like, oh, we're just going to make it hard then.
Yeah.
so you can't optimize.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and it is one of the things we have been like wrapping our head around a lot. I think there's a few things, like obviously players do want to optimize, and you need to respect that to some extent, like, growth, growing in power, like that. That's a, at least in our game, I think we have been like saying like that's a fair want and need as a player. You have a righteous fight to fight. The bad guys are really bad guys, and you should grow in power. You should become stronger because you need to kill these people. Essentially, or at least push back and fight, as you would probably say, right? So I think there's some things that you have to respect, and player growth and being stronger and so on is one of them. But we are fighting. So I'm not sure. I think what we're mostly fighting is player expectations. Like when you go into any game to begin with, and I feel the same thing. I feel almost stress if I like see an object and like, should I pick it up? Will I need this object later? Like so that's also one of the reasons why I think a lot of players just pick up stuff because they don't really know what is expected out of them. Would I be required to backtrack and find these things later? And I think so that is a kind of like a very real thing to try to fight. And as you're saying, like you can do that with negative constraints. Like I had kind of like the friction it takes to pick something up. We also have like literally inventory management problems. So like, you cannot carry so much. So at some point, if you're picked up 50 branches, then you'll be like, okay, well, I have all the branches, but I don't have anything else. So that's also, but it's still a negative feeling. So some of these things we had to apply, but I think the other, so I don't know if we have a positive, I think fundamentally, I think it does come down to the mechanics, and that's something players can only learn slowly. What we realized is that like when we designed these things, we have we have a lot of harvestables in our game, also a lot of different harvestables in our game. But fundamentally, in the end, you might not need them that much. And I think players will slowly learn that like, oh, if you pick up a branch, fine, I can make a bow. And we have this kind of like loop of like, okay, well, you can make a stronger bow because now you learned another recipe. So yeah, I need another branch. And we need to engage you in these systems so it's not like a one-time thing. But like fundamentally, a lot of the things you go and pick up, it's just almost like a one-time thing. Like, oh yeah, I got this reed. Now I have the best reed. I can make the best bowstring, and that's fine. I don't need another one of those. But that thing has to be almost like felt. Like you have to kind of like force that down on the players. They will have to kind of like just experience the needs that we're putting in front of you. But we are, yeah. So I think I hope that can kind of like answer some of your questions.
So thank you, Lau. A big applause. Thank you so much for your talk.
I do. If anybody else has any questions or comments and so on, I can be outside in the lobby, and I would love to chat with you all. I'm very curious about your thoughts and opinions on these things. So I'll be out there in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
okay?
and we will be back in 15 minutes. So see you then.